Everything that's wrong with Moana 2. If you've been watching this channel for a while, or happen to be following ModernGurlz on Twitter, then you already know that I didn't have high hopes for Moana 2. Disregarding the fact that I'm just not a fan of all the lackluster sequels Disney has been churning out lately, the actual story didn't seem all that interesting to me. And now that the movie has officially come out, I can safely report that it's just as disappointing as I expected it to be. And that's putting it kindly. While part of me is happy to be proven right, because come on, I'm a Capricorn, the other part of me is incredibly disappointed to see how far a once innovative animation studio has fallen. Today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at Moana 2 and discuss all of the ways it fell flat, including the uninspired sidekicks, terrible pacing, boring villains, and god-awful music. Now obviously this is my opinion, so you're more than welcome to disagree. Just don't be an asshole about it. And even though it should be obvious, this review is going to be filled with spoilers, so don't say that I didn't warn you. Now let's get into it. The film starts off a few years after the first, with Moana embracing her wayfinder role and exploring the islands around Motunui. During one of these excursions, she unearths a bowl with an island and a group of stars on it, and she decides that it must be a clue to finding other people. During a ritual, she receives a vision from one of her ancestors, who reveals that a powerful god, Nalo, sank the magical island of Motu-Fetu to separate humans from one another and weaken them, and if it remains hidden, Moana's people will eventually die off. If that sounds eerily similar to the premise from the first film, that's because it is. Moana rounds up a crew made up of Motunui villagers, including the carpenter Loto, bookworm Moni, and farmer Keke. And along with her pets, Pua and Hehe, they set out for Motu-Fetu. They immediately bump into the Kakamora tribe, who capture them, only for the two groups to realize that they're both after the same thing, reconnecting the islands and defeating Nalo. One of the Kakamora joined them on their quest, because we didn't have enough characters to keep track of, and by working together, they're able to paralyze a giant clam that is hiding the lair of Matangi. Although she was heavily teased as the movie's main villain, Matangi is actually Nalo's unhappy henchwoman, and she helps Moana escape and reunite with Maui, who is similarly seeking Motu-Fetu. As they continue on their quest, they're ambushed by some of Nalo's monsters, who damage the ship and almost kill Moni. The group washes ashore a small island, and Moana's confidence is shaken, but after a song and dance number, Maui is able to convince her to keep going. They're able to repair their ship and make their way to Motu-Fetu, which is hidden by a giant storm. Initially, they attempt to fight their way through, but Moana realizes that Nalo only cares about the humans, so she uses their boat as a distraction while Maui pulls the island up from the ocean floor with his giant hook. Before he can pull it up, Nalo strikes him with a bolt of lightning, taking away his powers, and it seems as though all hope is lost. Just then, Moana dives into the water herself, but when she touches the island, Nalo kills her with another bolt of lightning. Maui jumps in after her, and after a heartfelt chant, Moana's ancestors appear and turn her into a demigod, bringing her back to life. Maui also regains his powers, and the pair are able to raise the island up together. As they stand there, dozens of other ships conveniently begin arriving, and Moana leads them back to Motunui, where everyone rejoices at being reconnected. The film ends with Nalo planning his revenge, with Tamatoa the crab offering his assistance as he similarly harbors a grudge against Moana and Maui. Moana 2 was originally developed as a TV show, and I feel like you can really tell. Now, it's not as egregious as Belle's Magical World or Atlantis Milo's Return, which took unrelated episodes from scrapped TV shows and tied them together with a basic subplot. But Moana 2 still isn't the most pleasant viewing experience. The pacing is probably what's most impacted by this, with random conflicts being introduced and then wrapped up every 20 minutes, just like they would if it were TV. It's super formulaic. We start off on a fun adventure, then there's a random conflict and a new villain, followed by a song, and finally a neat resolution. Then it happens all over again, about 5 times actually. Sure, the overarching narrative involves Motu-Fetu, but the film keeps getting sidetracked on its way there that it's exhausting. Now, one thing that I want to make abundantly clear is that if this had remained a television show, then I genuinely think that Disney had something great on their hands, because a premise where Moana visits new locations and meets new characters is perfect for an episodic format. The idea just doesn't work for a movie, which is what my critiques are directed at. In a TV show, you can introduce dozens of new characters no problem, because you actually have the wiggle room to develop their personalities, expand on their motivations, and highlight their relationship dynamics. With only an hour and 40-minute runtime, Moana 2 doesn't have that luxury, and their choice to introduce so many new characters was one of their biggest mistakes. In total, there are 7 new characters: Simea, Moana's younger sister, her 3 Motunui crew members, Kotu the Kakamora, Matangi, and Nalo. Then there's the pre-existing characters on top of that. Because the film is trying to cram so many people into the story, these new additions are incredibly one-note. Each of the crew members suffers from an affliction that almost all Disney protagonists have nowadays, which is quirkiness. They simply cannot resist the urge to talk to themselves, make funny faces, and get overexcited about random things. Sure, they have a few traits that differentiate them, like Keke being old and grumpy, Loto handy and confident, and Moni excitable and passionate, but that's about it. Apart from Keke, who gets a little less curmudgeonly by the third act, they don't even have an arc over the course of the film, and it often feels like they're just there to give Moana someone to talk to. Out of the 3, Loto feels the most superfluous, and I think the film could have easily combined her and Moni into one character. Because there's not enough time to get into their motivations, these characters desperately needed to serve a greater purpose within the story, and honestly, killing one of them would have been a great way to do that. Now I know what you're all thinking, this is a kids movie, but I need to remind you that Disney has used death with great success in the past. Just look at Bing Bong, Bambi's mother, Mufasa, or Tadashi. When done correctly, it's not just a sad moment, but it can actually serve as the catalyst for a character's growth. I'd probably kill off Moni, since he has the most connections out of the new characters, and I feel like Moana's breakdown in the second act would be a lot more believable if their journey had actually had a tangible consequence. Plus, just imagine if Moni had been there when Moana was revived. It'd be a real 1-2 punch to the gut. Like, yes, we did it, but not all of us made it. The first Moana movie poked fun at the animal sidekick trope that Disney often uses, but it seems as though that self-awareness ended there.
If you wear a dress and you have an animal sidekick, you're a princess.
I have no complaints about Heihei and Pua being more prominent in the sequel. I just would have appreciated a wider variety of gags, because it just winds up being derivative of the first film.
That's good pork. Oh, don't want the pork getting cold. Gotta stop doing that.
Kotu the Kakamora is a cute addition to the sidekick lineup, but his personality is similarly lacking. I don't know, maybe I'm just used to Disney's older animal sidekicks like Miko, Iago, and Pegasus, who served a purpose besides selling merchandise. I truly feel like the measure of a great Disney movie is its villain, and Nalo is just a complete and utter disappointment. First of all, we don't even see him until the credits. Prior to that point, he's just a cloud. And when we do see him, he's just some dude. Tekka was a lot more intimidating in comparison. I had suspected that Matangi was a red herring from the very beginning because she was featured a bit too prominently in advertising, but I was still surprised by how unimportant she wound up being in the final product. She does have one of the catchiest songs in the film, so that's a plus, but otherwise, she's pretty forgettable. There was clearly an attempt to make her somewhat mysterious, like we can't quite tell if she's good or bad, but I think this just winds up making her feel wishy-washy. I know I've already drawn a lot of comparisons to older Disney projects in this review, but John Silver, Kuzco, Kovu, and Megara are great examples of morally gray characters whose personalities are still clearly defined. Simea is probably the most memorable of the new characters, and although she's pretty dang adorable, that sort of loud, sassy sibling is nothing special in the Disney universe, and I'd argue that she's practically identical to Coda in Brother Bear or Ranjan in The Jungle Book 2.
Come on, Mowgli, wake up, it's morning! You said we would go to... You said you'd bring me a present.
Now, I'm by no means saying that that personality type doesn't exist in real life. In fact, I'd bet a lot of people would say that Simea reminds them of their siblings or their children. I just feel like they could have done a lot more with her. Instead of throwing Moana with these random crew members that she has no relation to, I would have liked to have seen a deeper exploration of her family. Remember that in the first film, Moana and her father aren't exactly on the same page, and although they make amends when she returns home, I think there was plenty of room to further develop that relationship in the sequel. Considering her father expressed an interest in voyaging in the first film, why not have him actually join Moana on her quest? In fact, bring her mother along too. It can be a big family adventure to save their village. Obviously, they'd planned to leave Samaya behind, but like the little rascal she is, she'd just stow away on board. A lot of Disney movies focus on the relationship between a child and their parent, or between two siblings. Why not play around with the entire family dynamic for once? Controversial, I know, but the first Moana movie wasn't my cup of tea either. There's no denying that it was beautiful to look at, but other aspects of the film didn't work for me. For one, I didn't like Maui or Moana, which is a pretty big issue considering they're the main characters, but I found Moana a bit too adorkable, while Maui was just a more irritating Dwayne Johnson. The other issue I had was the music. I simply do not like Lin-Manuel Miranda's style, especially when he teams up with Disney, and it's why I've only been able to watch Encanto a single time. Because Moana 2 was initially developed as a TV series, I suspect that Disney attempted to cut costs by not having Miranda return, hence the hiring of Abigail Barlow and Emily Bear, who are best known for the unofficial Bridgerton musical that they wrote on TikTok in 2021. Most of the duo's work has been created for TikTok, and I think this social media influence negatively impacted the entire Moana soundtrack. Half of the songs come across like generic pop ballads with incredibly repetitive imagery, while the other half are just an attempt to emulate Miranda's faux rap style, but they don't flow as well and wind up feeling corny. Obviously, Auli'i Cravalho has an amazing voice, but even she can't save these songs. One thing about both Moana movies that irks me are the modern jokes. Now again, that's not unique in the Disney universe, just look at the genie in Aladdin. But in that case, it felt intentional, with everything about that character being anachronistic in order to differentiate him from the more normal characters. In Moana, everyone makes these sorts of jokes. Maui, Moana, Moni, even Tui. Disregarding how heavy-handed they are, they also date the movie exponentially. Remember that god-awful tweeting joke? Although I wasn't a fan of Moana and Maui's personalities in the first film, I did appreciate the development of their friendship and their individual growth. It made them feel like real people who went on a journey that actually had an impact on them. In the sequel, they're just kind of there. Moana starts off confident and self-assured, and ends the film the exact same way. Sure, she has a small hiccup in the middle of it, but it happens so suddenly that it doesn't really make sense, and it's later resolved so quickly in such a silly way that it feels like a waste of time. Even though the "they're dead, just kidding" trope is a staple of the Disney brand, I'll have to be honest and say that I'm pretty tired of it, especially when it comes to the main characters, since we all know Disney would never actually kill them off. But I do think it worked in Moana, since there was actually a payoff that resulted in the character changing, and becoming a demigod made perfect sense for Moana. What with the talking to water and seeing spirits, it felt like it was always her destiny, and it's one of the few positive things I can say about the film. However, I do wish that they hadn't given Maui his powers back. A big part of his character is this idea that he needs to protect Moana and all of humanity, but what happens when they don't need him anymore? With Moana becoming a demigod and all the islands being reconnected, wouldn't it be a natural progression of his story to finally be able to live a normal life? Then, in the inevitable sequel, you could have that be his primary conflict. Becoming human would also be a great way to give him a romantic interest. Then you could finally get rid of the weird undertones between him and Moana, which are just impossible to ignore in the sequel. Like, it's actually crazy. Other than everything I already mentioned, I also don't think the movie looked very good, especially the background characters, who looked like they came straight out of an AI prompt. Unfortunately, despite all of these shortcomings, Moana 2 has found massive success at the box office, bringing in over $400 million its first week and breaking several records. Now, I've never equated financial success to a film's quality. After all, some of Disney's highest grossing projects include the Lion King remake, the live-action Beauty and the Beast, Incredibles 2, and Toy Story 4. But I'm afraid that the Walt Disney Company doesn't feel the same way I do. Regardless of Moana's less than stellar critical reception, its commercial success is inevitably going to prompt the creation of even more half-hearted sequels. It'll be like the 2000s all over again, just in theaters instead of on VHS. At this point, it's hard to believe that for most of Disney's history, they only made original projects, and now, more than half their roster is based on their pre-existing IP. Sure, we have a few new ideas like Elio and Hoppers on the way, but if they're anything like Wish or Onward, that doesn't exactly bode well. Now, I'm not saying the people working on these projects aren't genuinely trying their best, but Disney's executives are so money-driven nowadays that they routinely stand in the way of creativity. And at this point, I think the Disney name sells more tickets than the actual quality of their work. What did you think of Moana 2? I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!